Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Turning In podcast. Today, Amy and I spent some time chatting about the wonderful world of dating and how different types of parts might come to play in that lovely, lovely world. For those of you that are dating, I hope that you find this helpful and maybe learn something about what might or maybe not be going on with you or the person that you're engaging with. I really enjoyed this episode, being that I've kind of recently gone through some of this experience or been delved into the world of dating recently. Thank you again, as always, for coming back. We really appreciate it, and we will jump right into it. Dr. Crawford.
Oh, that's new. You haven't sang to me before.
I actually am offended that you don't remember that I have sang to you before, but
not on the podcast. I mean, you haven't introed us with a jingle jangle. You have?
Yeah, I freaking have.
Must have been a dissociative part of mine that blocked that out.
I'm pissed. Not really. Welcome back.
Welcome.
Welcome back. There we go.
To the Turning In podcast.
Hell yeah. There we go. There's our new intro.
Yep.
I'm just going to cut that little part and put it.
Brilliant.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Turning In podcast. Meghan Jones here, Dr. Amy Crawford here. Very excited as usual. Actually, we're both incredibly tired today.
Yeah, and I don't know why I have this much deeper voice going on right now, too. It is, in fact, me. But
yes, it is. Yeah, change of seasons, I think, has both of us as we do our early morning recording. Just a tad bit lethargic, but we will survive. We will prevail, and it will all be okay, everyone. Today, yeah, as far as we know. Depends on which part of me you're talking to that day.
Yeah, statistically, probably it will be. And we don't know.
God knows. So today's episode a little, it's a little bit different. We have kind of a topic in mind, and it's not to say that our other episodes we have this like rigid agenda, but you and I were talking the other day and started kind of discussing the topic of dating. And both of us were like, that would be a pretty cool kind of episode to weave into IFS, just because there are certain things that I think come up in dating for people that may not come up in other relationships. And that's a fair bit of kind of what I've been thinking about as we planned to do this episode of like what that difference is. What's that face that you have on and want to say something?
The face I have on is the word relationship. And it just made me want to speak to, again, the same horn we've been drumming. Those are different instruments, but you get the idea. The same horn we've been tooting, the same drum we've been beating. IFS is a relationship model, right? So it's a relational model. So of course, when folks are entering a dating space, which is a relational situation, parts are going to show up in like crazy forms, right? And so what got me thinking about this episode is I have quite a boatload of clients who are on the market, on the dating market. And a lot of times they'll come to session discussing what that's like for them. And that's what got me thinking about this, where I was like, dang, what a crazy world to be dating in. And dang, what a crazy amount of parts are interfacing with each other as new, potential, weird, exciting dating opportunities emerge. And it's like, yeah, a parts shit show is what I'm noticing. And so that's what got me thinking about it.
Well, I think it's interesting. So I have a lot of like relevant recent experience on the topic as well, right? Yeah. So And in trying to do the whole dating situation differently than I had in the past,
Mm-hmm.
less parts led, more self-led, being more mindful, things like that. I went through last year being in kind of like a fair to moderately unhappy relationship, breaking up earlier this year, going through like some major healing, and then dating, and now I'm in, a happy situation that I don't want to
Yeah.
disclose too much about, but it's been really relevant to my life as well, similar to some of your clients, and it is a very interesting kind of like world to be in
Yeah.
nowadays. I don't
Well, and
like
even like
it's
with
just
dating apps and like how dating
that's
has
what I mean.
evolved, right? Like,
I think there's tons of opportunity, and maybe this was, back in the olden days in the 90s.
oh my gosh. Megan is considerably younger than me, just so everyone knows
I was
that.
was
Uh-huh.
born in the 90s, but I wasn't dating
Yeah.
in the 90s. Way back in the early
Uh-huh.
1900s
Yeah.
or the late
Jesus.
1900s.
Uh-huh.
Do you know
God.
that that's what the kids are saying back in the 1900s now? Just so
Oh.
you're aware.
Oh.
That's
Excellent.
what,
Good.
yeah, in the
Mm-hmm.
1900s. So
Mm-hmm.
19, let's say 1996, everybody. When
Ooh.
dating apps weren't a thing. Um, I think that there's more opportunity now to like you for our firefighters to come online and to
Oh
use the whole
yeah.
dating apps as an escape or a relaxation tool or as a game or I don't know. As we were
As
talking about,
manipulation is a power play, and then how our managers come in and put on a forward facing face to yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's really interesting. And like I said, I have, recent relevant experience about kind of all of that in some way. So I want to sort of punt it back to you. Do you notice, some of those themes? Like we just gave those examples when you're talking about your clients, are there, so I guess to frame the question, when I was thinking about this episode, I was really stoked when we were like, yeah, let's do it on dating.
Mm-hmm.
And it got my mind thinking, outside of the things that we just talked about, what is it when you're kind of going into dating that, and some of this may be biased, right, from my own experience. What is it that does make that different than maybe going into a new workspace or a new blossoming friendship? And I think the two things that came up for me is when you're dating, if you're doing so to like find a partner, and maybe even not, maybe if you're just doing so to, casually, find new people to be around, whatever, there is a certain level of depth of intimacy that you're probably seeking that's different than a coworker space or a
Mm-hmm.
friendship. So there's one thing. And also there's sort of this like scarcity thing I think that
Mm.
comes up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if those are themes that you may see with, people that you work with or some of the trends in the language that you work with, but those are the two things that I was like, what really does differentiate the dating space when it comes to like our parts and what may arise as compared to these other.
I definitely agree with what you're saying. And again, everything I'm sharing is completely anecdotal. Like, I have done zero research on this topic other than just being in relationship with my clients. So yeah, so this is all just me talking smack and my opinions basically. But so and when I do talk smack though, I think it's pretty fruitful still. So
I agree.
so scarcity is definitely an element, I think, that activates our parts more so in the dating space from what my listening, observing, and hearing of my clients, and also even just being in your life, right? Knowing what you're going through and have gone through on this path. And then there is, like you said, a different level of intimacy, even if the intention is just to hook up. I think that's
Mm.
what kids call it nowadays. That parts of us believe, yeah, we're just doing this to hook up. Who cares? One night stand, whatever. It's just sex. Cool. and there's still going to be parts up, right? Now, when we think of IFS, really emphasizing the S of systems, and we've done a lot of talk about that inverted triangle of the balancing act of how all of our parts interplay with each other. Dating is going to amplify that, in my opinion, because of the scarcity, because of the vulnerability, because of the potential risk and exposure. And in my opinion, what seems to always come down to the tip of that triangle is some form of shame around not being good enough, not being lovable, being seen for who I am, therefore the fears of abandonment or rejection. And so what I do think happens, however, even if that is probably the same undercurrent that shows up with us in most relationships, whether professional or platonic, I still do believe that the way in which our protective system will show up even more extremely in a dating environment, because oftentimes it feels like more is on the line. And if you think of it too, partnering is pretty deeply embedded in our DNA from an evolutionary perspective, which is then going to activate those primitive burdens and wounds of rejection, being cast out, right? So that's my anecdotal, non-research based thinking around it.
Well, and you are, you do have lots of, you're an LMFT and PhD, and, so there's definitely a lot of
definitely my
education there.
past academia has led me to my belief system right now.
Yeah.
So it's steeped in some legit stuff.
It's not entirely anecdotal, but
no, it's not. Yeah, like I just pulled open the People magazine and pulled it in there.
To your point, I think you just really eloquently explained the comment that I made about like the depth of intimacy, right? Because as we're going through, and like you said, even if it is just you're on the dating apps or doing whatever behavior for the sole purpose you think of this hookup culture and getting that need met, there is still a different depth of intimacy there that you're engaging in than you probably are with a fair range of other people in your life, depending on, I guess, the scenario.
Depending upon your boundaries and scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that there is some level of discretion there, because our parts are always listening, and we talk about that a lot. Our parts are always watching, our parts are always listening, and I think we usually use that term or that saying when we talk about our exiles, and that those are where a lot of those burdens lie for the rejection and the abandonment and the not good enough, unworthy, etc. And so it's kind of makes the point more important to, in my opinion, and this is the sort of like journey that I went on of wanting to, I wasn't interested or engaged whatsoever in hookup culture, but even as you're approaching the dating and looking at a different depth of intimacy, doing that in a self-led way as much as possible, and like doing everything that I could. I'm going to kind of like just speak from my own experience, doing everything that I could to, I can't say that I realistically like unburdened all of these exiles in the matter of a few months whatsoever, but really I did work. I like had a moment where I was on the dating apps and kind of like getting involved with people that like just didn't feel right, and I had to be really direct there and step back and then take myself completely off the market for a certain time, at which point I was like hitting my self-care really hard and hitting my therapy really hard and like doing everything I could to contain
and parts of you still had a temptation to go back on.
100%.
Right?
100%. They had, and whether that was the manager or the firefighter, like whatever, but it's like that is the reality sometimes of like this not being really easy. It's not being really easy. And I will say I did get back on sooner than I had planned because I kind of gave myself this timeline. I was like, I'm going to give it 6 months of like really hard work. I had a
So a
shift.
manager set a timeline for you.
Right.
Okay.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
Like, you'll be ready when check, 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 check. You've
Right.
checked all
Yeah.
of these. And I had a different experience where in a really like self-led way, I was like, no, I actually feel really ready. Got back on, got back involved with an individual that same individual who I had previously kind of had this interesting feeling about, and had yet another opportunity in a self-led way to say, you know what, this isn't for me, and be really direct and check in with myself along the way. And I don't think I did it perfectly, but I think it's an interesting example in my recent history to be able to really exemplify the different ways that we can engage in the dating atmosphere, both healthy and unhealthy, and what it might look like to take a turn in and press the reset button.
Well,
And
and I'm sorry
yeah. No, go ahead.
like I and what you're saying though, is you're saying this, I also think and remember, self is on a continuum, right? Never will we be
Absolutely.
in relationship in 100% self. We're hoping to be self-led, where our parts are still there, maybe even somewhat strongly, and self is just even a quarter step in the forefront of those parts. So self-led. And so the difference, I think, is coming at it from that self-led place, which then also in the external world gives those younger littles or exiles an opportunity to see us redoing things for them in relationship that maybe other parts of us screwed up previously, right? And the biggest thing I keep hearing with clients, I don't have a ton of friends, so like that's not true. I was gonna say, well,
Close.
I don't have a ton of close friends, and that's okay. So, but I either have friends who are in long-term partnerships, or friends, a few who are free agents, or just starting in a relationship or dating, or getting out of a relationship, trying to navigate, do I want to start doing this whole dating thing? So between personal relationships and professional relationships, what I'm noticing the theme to be is how to have different boundaries in new relationships that I'm establishing. What does that look like? What does that bring up for my parts? Is it okay to have boundaries in new relationships? And what all of that looks like. The more self-led we are, the healthier the relationship's going to be from the start. And by healthy, I mean maybe sustainable longer term, or maybe healthy means after going out for a beer and a pizza, recognizing, nope, this isn't for me. And then having the boundary then versus, oh, maybe I can make this fit. Maybe if I meet them again, maybe it'll work. Maybe, that was just parts of them showing up. But being self-led puts us in a position both to be part detectors for ourselves and part detectors for the person that we are beginning this thing with, right? Again, please don't, as those of you listening to this must have some sort of inherent interest in IFS, please don't on a first date or ever in relationship start pointing out the person's parts that you're noticing. The part detecting for you, like, oh, wow, I'm noticing a part that maybe is nervous. I'm noticing a part that, so having awareness of how also the person you're engaging with is coming at you with their parts. Because I can promise you that I would say 99% of dating app profiles are written from a part of a person. Again, I've never been on a dating app, so I don't know. And I have a pretty strong stinky sense that all profiles are written by managers, not the self of the person.
100, someone who has been on dating apps,
right?
100%. And that's also something that I was, thinking about with all of this. But what you're saying is so incredibly true, both with being able to internally suss out kind of what the person you're engaging with may be having come up, because we all have parts, and it is not about, I love that you reiterated that point, because it's not about going about this whole dating experience is like you're 100%, I had this like 100% self moment and then I went about, it's like not this burning
Right.
bush thing. That's not how it happens. But you also made a really important point that I do and did relate to, of being able to have those direct conversations in a kind, compassionate manner when things were not actually right for me, instead of feeding into the scarcity part and the
Yep.
abandonment and the fear of rejection and all of that. Being able to say, you know what, this just doesn't, it doesn't feel like we're, you know, on the same page or are wanting the same things. And so I'm going to kind of make the choice to remove myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that builds such a huge amount of confidence. Like
Right.
in the system, like my system, in my ability to navigate this entire,
Mm-hmm.
realm of life. It's really empowering. And I hope that I can continue to do that and that people can like
Yeah.
practice that, right? Because it really does. I think in any sense and realm of our lives, when we do that and we have this moment of calm and clarity and compassion and make whatever boundary decision is right. But really, it was for me really impactful in the dating game.
Well, it's a game changer, and some of our parts might backlash at the beginning because they're not used to this, because of the scarcity, because of the abandonment. They're used to other parts overriding boundaries, if you will. And it's huge. When I'm thinking of this episode, I have 3 clients in particular that really come to mind with it, and seeing their systems navigate being in the world of dating. And I was working with one a couple of weeks back that is, in the first few weeks of being in a newer relationship, unclear of what their greater objective is, if it's more partnership or just, someone to hang out with, hook up with, whatever. And in that navigating, this client has really been very clear around what's okay and what's not okay for them, and really deliberately and intentionally breaking old patterns, such as seeing the person every single day because of the fear, if I don't, they'll go away. Breaking the patterns of, as this, as they're together on an evening, adhering to their self-care of getting to bed at a time that's reasonable for their work schedule and not compromising that, and going, oh yeah, it's okay, we can stay up till 2 a.m, even though I have to wake up and get to work first thing in the morning. Right. And then as a result of creating these boundaries early on, the parts that are fearful of, if I create these, I will be rejected. Therefore, maybe I should compromise. Maybe I should be easygoing. I don't want to be high maintenance. Right. And how we navigate all of those parts. And what I was saying to this client was, but what if you're actually setting up the roadmap and the blueprint for a really healthy relationship right now, versus 6 months later when your ass has been kicked because you're sleep deprived and parts of you have been compromising your needs. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, hold on. Actually, no, this is too much. And I need to do this or that or the other. Like, what if we all started relationships from a self-led place that do break old patterns, that in fact is the blueprint for what may or may not be a healthy relationship? Because if you get rejected for having boundaries in the beginning, guess what? Not your person. Better to find that out in the first 3 weeks than 6 months later.
Well, it's I love that sleep example, because I've actually done that pretty recently with the situation that I'm in, because I am a grandmother. I was in bed at 8:45 last night.
So was I.
Yeah. So we are grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case for the individual that I'm in a relationship with. And in the beginning, I was doing that exact same thing. So that's such a
Mm-hmm.
funny and relevant example that I relate to a lot, and had a similar moment where it's like, what? Like, I'm tired. Wait a second. My routine is
Yeah.
just as important. And
Mm-hmm.
this, and I'm at no risk, literally, in the relationship that I'm currently in losing him because I want to go to bed. He's known that
Right.
about me the entire time. However, that part that wants to like
Mm-hmm.
hang, I want to stay up, I want to spend time with him too,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like, to what consequence? You know what I
Right.
mean? Because that
Right.
is all part driven, and that's just such a funny example and a very
Mm-hmm.
simple example. It could
Yeah.
go to the quite, extreme end of,
Mm-hmm.
for me, the extreme end that feels really awful would be the example, again, just for me, is like sleeping around with people. That is not
Right.
something
Yeah.
within my personal moral compass, or that feels good to, my system, and feels really scary and risky.
Right. But even
Um,
like maybe saying yes to sexual intimacy before the rest of your system consents,
mhm.
right? It may not even have to be as a, to
Like
the end.
multiple partners,
Right.
but like just with one partner, for
Right.
sure.
Right.
And the
You know.
backlash that
Mhm.
that causes and can have, it's the literal opposite of the confidence that we were just talking
Yeah.
about how holding true to yourself in the beginning and having these small boundaries, as risky as they might feel, and breaking those patterns as risky as it might feel, not doing that, the backlash that it has, is the wave that comes is huge, it
Oh,
feels like.
very much so. And also with the boundaries can also become incredibly rigid, which are
Mm,
part driven also, right? Where it's like, by God, I'm going to do this different. Therefore, and you set kind of unrealistic, unreasonable boundaries, both for yourself
mhm,
and the relationship, perhaps, right? Because of trying to protect yourself and make it look so vastly different than what you've done in the past. And so it always comes down to doing that U-turn in the moment of, what feels okay to me? What are my parts consenting to? What's safe for me, my well-being, while nurturing this relationship, and then we didn't even talk about all the hormones and chemicals and things that are
mhm.
involved in a new relationship that also make it even more challenging for those parts to maybe have self-led boundaries. You've got dopamine, all sorts of other things pumping throughout your
Pumping.
bodies, right? As you enter a new relationship that can feel exciting and scary. And sometimes our bodies can't tell the difference,
Mhm. Well,
right?
I'm glad that you went there, um, to taking the U-turn and turning in, because
Mm-hmm.
whichever side of the spectrum we're on, if we're in the dating game, um, and whatever level of self is online, I'm going to use the example of not really having a ton of self, and
Mm-hmm.
either engaging in like really rigid boundaries where they have to meet this checklist before I'll even
Right.
go on a date, or before I'll even whatever, or being, you know, loosey goosey and just like saying yes to literally whatever, whenever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was like, well, what do we do to get more centered? And the
Yeah.
answer is always the same. It feels
Mm-hmm.
like, where it's slow down.
Yeah.
Who's driving the bus? What do
Yeah.
they need? Like,
Yeah.
like, take the
Yeah.
U-turn,
Well, yeah, and you can
chill.
even map it out, right? You can draw
Mhm,
the upside down triangle and start thinking, what are my behaviors that I'm engaging in right now?
mhm,
What are the feelings? What are the sensations? What emotional, vulnerable energy are they trying to protect? And or yeah, so it's like you can even bring this out into an external map, right?
mhm.
Of who's showing up, as you're saying, but bring it to paper. Sometimes that also gives the system some relief to see itself externalized.
Well, can we, and I don't know how easy this is gonna be able to explain verbally, so if
Mm-hmm.
it's not super easy, then maybe we can, or both, we can throw a picture of like a trailhead on our
Mm-hmm.
Instagram. But I think that that's when you're talking about mapping, that's not really something
Yeah.
that we've spoken about on the podcast. And I think when it comes to dating, that's a great example of,
Yeah.
you gave the example of the individual like who isn't sure the circumstance that they might want to pursue with this one person, or maybe you're in a situation where you're dating more than one person and you kind of are
Mm-hmm.
getting to the crux where you need to decide, yeah, decide what you want with whom or with neither.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a externalization of sort of all of the parts that are involved. Can you kind of like verbally explain the process of doing a trailhead or a map? I'm not
Yeah.
sure if
So
that's kind of
So if someone wants to kind of follow along, and this is going to sound very, very, very different for everyone, how you do it's the same. What you'll put on the mapping will be different, obviously. However, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of crossover. So if anyone wanted to like play along with this exercise, and let's legit just do it over dating, since that's the topic of our episode right now, is if you were to draw on a piece of paper, make it fairly large, a triangle that's upside down, flat portion on top, tip at the bottom, the two angles on the side, and you can even just label the top on the flat portion dating. And from there, what you could do is then just kind of slow it down a little, connect with your breath some, maybe let your body settle in, let self catch up just a touch, and begin noticing what's showing up for you in response to either dating or being in a new relationship. Right? I have a client who's entering a newer relationship, and if I were to think of how this looks for their system, and this is a different client than the previous one I just spoke to, right now what's showing up is anxiety, excitement, some sabotaging behaviors, some mixed messages of texting, trying to keep it chill, but those kind of can be interpreted as being in the friend zone, not texting when they want to, playing the game of, well, I should make the person that I'm engaging with text me first. Those are all behaviors, right? So it don't get too hung up as to maybe which side of the triangle you put this on, but any of the feelings, thoughts, behaviors, or impulses that are more preventative or protective in a proactive sort of way, we would put on our manager side. So things such as the anxiety, that would be probably pretty managerial. What does the anxiety make me want to do? It makes me want to respond back and say, hey, you mentioned that maybe Wednesday we could grab dinner. I haven't heard from you yet, wondering if that's still a thing, right? Like, do you have a time? Does that still work for you? Right? And then a firefighter who's like, F it, that's not my job. That should be their job, who then withdraws. And then when you do get a text, waits just as long as it took that person to hit you up in the first place. Right? So we've got that push pull. And then who are all these parts protecting? Vulnerable translates to woundable. What woundable part are these protecting? The little one who's terrified of being rejected if they put themselves out there. Okay. And then just kind of keep visualizing internally and asking, all right, hey, the part of me that rigidly wants to set these boundaries and makes it so clear right now what it is we're doing and why it is I'm doing it, or the part of me that wants to hotwire connection and share all of my trauma right at the first dinner to make sure it's out there so you know exactly what you're dealing with. Those are all managers, right? They're proactively trying to control the shit out of the situation, right? And then our firefighters come in and do what they do, whether it's, let me see if anybody else is out there that, I don't even know the language of dating apps, that has liked me, swiped. What is it? I don't even know. Like,
Yeah, that's fine. I guess it depends on the app.
Okay. Like, but you know what I mean, right? Where
yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm not getting my needs met here. They haven't reached out to me in a timely fashion. Let me go back on the app and see if anybody else is interested in me.
It's like this,
Firefighter.
yeah, it's like, I don't want to use this word, but it's coming up. It's like the firefighter has this almost like retaliatory, like
Yes. Yes.
energy of like, well, fine, you didn't, and so I'm gonna dot dot
Right. Or let me post on Instagram and see if they watched my story. Let me,
dot.
you know, let me
Yes.
post a picture of me going out with my girlfriends looking really good and see if they like it, like all the games that parts of us play to get our needs met in external ways, right? And so that didn't do a really great job, in all honesty, of talking through how one can externalize it. However, that's the idea, right? Is begin open-heartedly getting curious about who and what's showing up for you in this dating world, in this new relationship space, because you'll get a lot of insight if you just take the time to slow down and go, ooh, parts may want to do this. And remember, even if you don't know parts language, parts show up through feelings, thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, physical sensations, fantastical thinking. What will I do if he or she does this? What will I do if they do this? Script playing, thinking about the conversation ahead of time. That would be managerial. And so those are ways that we can just begin conceptualizing what's going on for our system. And if you're unfamiliar with the inverted balancing act triangle thing, which most of our listeners probably are, go old school and draw a big circle in the middle of a piece of paper, like what we used to do in second grade. Like, I think they were called like spider diagrams or something, where you put down in the center dating and start throwing around it like a brainstorm, all the stuff that shows up for you, the thoughts, the behaviors, the feelings, the impulses, the physical sensations, the fears, right? And that will give you a sense as to who's showing up, because every single thing you put on there will be a part.
Right?
And
that's not easy. Like, that's not easy to sit down, especially when it comes to something that can be so sensitive as dating and making a decision about who to pursue between a couple of people or whatever. Like, that's not easy, because there really are, I mean, the amount of parts and the amount of overlap that those parts and those feelings may have, that's not an easy web to unweave. And it's honestly not even easy to sometimes be honest with yourself when you're sitting down and doing the map. Like the parts that can come up just by putting that stuff on paper in judgment of ourselves, or whatever. And I think that's what makes it even more important because you might have somebody that looks really good on paper, and you really want to pursue them for this reason, but you're having actual real feelings. And I don't know, it can feel convoluted in dating in ways that I think it doesn't always feel in other realms of life. And it makes it that much more, because of the depth of intimacy and because our parts of Palooza can be so dramatized in ways. I think it makes it even more important to do it in a way that you're turning in and protective of yourself, not in like the protective system way, like. And thank you for explaining that, because that's actually a little bit, the way that you explained it is a little bit different than I even had done, like my own trailheads and stuff like that. I'd done them the old way that you used to teach. So I like the upside down triangle way and like categorizing it like that. That's a little different than what you had taught in the past. So I like that.
Well, like, who's preventative in my system? Who's reactive in my system? Right. And then what vulnerable energy are they trying to, who are they working on behalf of? Right. What vulnerable energy are they trying to keep under wraps and keep safe?
Well, yeah, I think it helps to identify, yeah, obviously you're identifying the categories of your protectors a little bit better, and
Mhm.
I think that helps make it a little more clear who they are protecting rather than
Right.
just identifying the parts. Like you
Mhm.
really are kind of getting down to what is their intent
Right.
quicker than just slapping it on paper, which is totally fine. So, I mean, you've got
Oh
to
yeah,
start by slapping it on
slap it
paper.
on, and you can also start by slapping it on paper and then evolve into the triangle, right?
Mhm.
As you get more clarity, as you slap it down on paper, I'm all about, as Brene calls it, your shitty first draft, where it's like dump it
Mm.
all out there and just get it on there on paper to go, oh dang, that's a lot. Because even that there is valuable to go, my gosh, I had no idea how many feelings, beliefs, fears,
Mhm.
thoughts I had around this. And then
Mhm.
if you want to bring on kind of sorry, y'all, you hear Luna crying at the door, my dog.
Yep.
Um, then it's like, let me get curious. Again, not a Sherlock Holmes type of curiosity, but like this one's proactive. So that's managerial. This one's more reactive. So that goes over there, firefighter. And, ooh, the fear of being hurt.
Mm.
That's Excel stuff, right? And you'll probably
Mhm.
have a handful of exile beliefs and feelings that are tender, right? That then our other behaviors are protecting.
Yeah. Well, and the amount of overlap we've talked about that can come up with those managers or those behaviors, and just being able to identify like, oh, this has been coming up a lot. What's triggered that, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. I think
Mm-hmm.
there are real life, outside of, putting our phones and items away and sitting and deep breathing. There are others, like actual fruitful skills that we can use, not just in dating, but I think within the topic of dating, it can be really, really helpful to do it um, just so mindfully, because it does
Mm-hmm.
bring up a lot, that innate tribal, like that mentality is real. It's like a
Yeah.
survival instinct. So,
Right. And then even too, noticing the patterns. The more we externalize our parts, we can start
mhm,
noticing the patterns because they're not in silos, right? It's
mhm,
a system that is working in complex dynamic at all times, and even I would encourage everyone, and this is, something I do. Obviously, we threw out the more larger topic of dating in general, and you could do this with dating, but you can also do it with, I didn't get the text in a timely fashion. That can be your topic. That can be the trailhead, and then what's
mm.
showing up for you there, right?
So you can do the general big topic of dating, or you
Right.
can do like the triggering event that's
Mm-hmm.
brought all of this thoughts and feelings up for you.
Yep, exactly.
Love. I love talking about dating. I love the topic of dating. I've been on like a billion dates. It's not even about dating, it's about, well, part of it's about dating because of all of the interesting goo that comes up with
Mm-hmm.
with the topics of romantic relationships, but really it's relationships. I like talking about
Yeah.
all of that
Yeah.
stuff because it's so relevant to all of us, and we all have our shit that comes out, like,
Mm-hmm. Well, if
inevitably.
we all do, right? Like, so if we're talking about our parts,
They all do too.
they all do too. So please do not forget
Mhm.
that, our listeners. We
Mhm.
have our parts, so do they. And especially in the dating realm, parts are going to be interfacing. Your parts are going to be interfacing with their parts. So keep that in mind. So, how can you go about it in a more self led way that is protective and safe for your system with self driving you to the date?
Yep. And then continuing hopefully on the date.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Amy.
You're
We've
welcome.
got a legitimate licensed marriage and family therapist talking us through dating. That doesn't get to happen all of the time, and I'm really lucky that I get you to guide me just in my life, because of less than your degree, but more of just because of who you are and how you formulated your opinions and how
Yeah,
willing
it's
you
way
are
harder
to
for me to show up though for you in relationship when you're relating because my mama
because
bear
you get
sister parts
protective.
show up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. but you're
But it's
welcome.
also helpful because usually I already have the inkling, and then
Yeah.
when your protective parts come up, I'm like, okay, something is a little bit off here,
Hmm.
So, but thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise and gifts with us, because it is grounding to be able to, and I hope it's been grounding for our listeners who may be going through dating or maybe going through some bump in a relationship, to be able to know
Hmm.
that there are skills that you can use. It is important to realize that not only do you have your stuff coming up, but they have theirs, and both things can be valid. And both things being valid doesn't mean that you don't get to hold boundaries for
Yeah.
whatever feels right for you. And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of like the underlying message, right? Of self-led
100%.
boundaries.
Yep.
So,
100%.
well, thank you for your time. We've got some really cool episodes upcoming, which I'm excited about. I know I say that a lot, but
And
we've got
different
some
episodes. We're going to
different.
be doing some
Mhm.
unique and varying topics that may
But
surprise some of you.
the shit-eating grin that you and I just
Mhm.
got on our faces. Yeah, I'm stoked for what's to come. I think that we've done a really good job up to this point. I hope that our listeners agree with laying the foundations and kind of having some of these conversations with guests where Amy and I are excited to introduce some new topics that may not be sort of like common within the realm of this topic of IFS. So
It
we
may
will.
surprise some of you and may go, what? And we may, yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. I think it'll be awesome. But thank you as always for tuning back into the Turning In podcast. Please be sure to um give us a review, give us a like anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and give us a follow on Instagram. Our handle is at Turning In Pod, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks.